Why did everyone freeze when the first RPG streaked across the sky? The blast swallowed the night in a pulse of white fire. Dust rained down like ash. The rotor wash from the Blackhawk spun it across the landing zone in a frantic storm, but even through the chaos, she stepped out of the helicopter like someone who had been here before, or maybe someone who wished she hadn't. They didn't know her yet, not really. To the SEALs who had been fighting for the last 10 minutes, she looked exactly like her file. A Navy nurse, average height, quiet face, medical crosspatch stitched to her shoulder. Her rifle hung crooked at her side like it didn't belong there, and her oversized medical pack bounced awkwardly as she jogged forward. It made sense they barely glanced at her. People rarely look twice at the one they assume won't be doing the shooting. Chief Petty Officer Morrison yelled over the gunfire, "Get the medic to the casualty, move." Ariana Brooks kept her head down, boots crunching on broken brick as she followed a SEAL inside the battered compound. She wasn't breathing hard. She wasn't shaking. And she wasn't looking anywhere but forward, as if she already knew where every danger sat, waited, and breathed. But none of them caught that. Not yet. Inside, the ceiling sagged, cracked open by a previous explosion. Staff Sergeant Richmond lay on a makeshift stretcher, his leg mangled, his face pale. Blood pulsed through a torn tourniquet as two shaken operators hovered beside him. He saw her and forced a pained laugh. "Doc, I'm bleeding out here." "You're not," she said softly, lowering herself to her knees. "Not yet." No hesitation, no wasted motion. Her hands were steady, too steady for someone under heavy fire. She cut away fabric, identified arterial points, and began fixing the damage with the calm focus of a surgeon. A shell detonated nearby. Dust sifted down over her hair, but she didn't look up. Mills, covering the doorway, found himself staring at her. "Doc, you ever been in a firefight this hot?" She didn't blink, once or twice. She pointed, morphine red pouch. Even while explosions shook the walls, she moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who refused to let panic touch her. Outside, gunfire intensified, closer now. Morrison's strained voice crackled through the radio. "They're flanking north and east. We're getting boxed in." Ariana didn't rush. She finished the IV, wrapped the leg with compression bandages, checked for shock. Her patient came first, always first. 2 minutes, she called out. "You don't have 2 minutes, Mills snapped. Something in her eyes shifted, not fear, not anger, but a resolve that carried weight. "I only need one." The eastern wall exploded. The shockwave threw Mills to the ground. He hit hard, ears ringing. The world dissolved into smoke, screams, and the silhouettes of hostiles pouring through a hole torn open by fire. Davis at the window fired back, but he was already hit, armor absorbing the blow with a dull thud. More shadows swarmed in, aggressive, confident, convinced they had trapped an American team with too many wounded and not enough shooters. Mills reached for his weapon, knowing with a cold certainty that this was the end. Too many angles, too little cover, too late. Then she stood up. Ariana rose slowly, as if shedding her previous shape. The quiet medic vanished. In her place stood someone heavier in the air, someone who had once lived in darker corners. Mills blinked through dust. What he saw didn't match anything they'd been told about her. She reached into her medical pack and pulled out a weapon no one had seen before. A compact HK-416 with a custom suppressor, the kind issued to people whose missions never made the news. The barrel came up smooth, too smooth. Her first shot dropped the lead hostile before he even cleared his rifle. 2 more fell before Mills could fully grasp the speed of her movement. She didn't scramble, she didn't panic. She flowed. 1 shot per breath, 1 target per heartbeat. A fighter's burst went wide. She sidestepped before he even fired. Mills couldn't understand how she knew. But she did. Then Ariana moved toward the breach, straight toward the fatal funnel, toward the kill zone every operator is trained to avoid. It was madness. It was suicide. But somehow the bullets missed her. And somehow hers never missed them. Davis lay stunned, whispering to himself, "What the hell? Who the hell is she?" She didn't answer. She didn't look at them. She was seeing something else, angles, timing, probabilities. The battlefield moved for her, not against her. "Mills," she said sharply, "get Richmond ready to move." Her voice carried command, not a request, an order. Davis gasped as she reloaded. That wasn't a combat reload, that was "I've never." "Davis," she snapped, "covering fire on my mark." She pulled a grenade from her vest. Mills stared. He was certain that pocket had been empty moments ago. "Mark!" Davis unleashed a spray of suppression fire. Ariana cooked the grenade, perfect timing, and sent it into the breach. The explosion screamed through the room, followed by silence, then the groans of wounded enemies. Before the debris settled, she swept the window, engaging new attackers with surgical precision. 3 targets, 3 rounds, 3 drops. Mills felt himself move because she told him to, not because he understood what was happening. He'd been in combat for years, seen impossible things. But he had never seen this. Outside, the enemy momentum broke. Fighters scattered. Some fled. The assault collapsed under a force they couldn't predict, couldn't understand, couldn't defend against. Morrison's voice hit the radio. "What's happening? Hostiles are retreating, talk to me." Ariana keyed her mic between shots. "Compound secure, moving casualties." "Brooks, how did you?" "No time, Chief. Use the window." She kneeled beside Richmond, lifted him in a fireman's carry like he weighed nothing, and signaled the team to move. Mills didn't argue this time. When they reached the LZ, the Blackhawk pilot was seconds from boarding. Morrison's team formed a perimeter while Ariana loaded Richmond, then the others. The air felt thick with disbelief. Inside the helicopter, she was back to checking vitals, back to her gentle voice, back to her quiet hands. Mills kept staring. He whispered, like he still wasn't sure she was real, "Doc, what did you just do?" She gave him a small, tired smile. "My job." He almost asked again. Morrison almost demanded answers, but none came. Outside, the night swallowed the battlefield behind them. Bodies they hadn't expected to see. A victory no one could explain. A nurse who wasn't only a nurse. A woman carrying 2 lives inside her chest. The one she showed the world, and the one she tried to bury. One that refused to stay buried. She pretended not to notice their stares. Pretended she wasn't shaking a little inside. Pretended this was just another mission. But she knew the truth in a place she kept locked away. She hadn't wanted to become that person again. She just hadn't had a choice. And as the helicopter carried them into the dark, she wondered, not for the first time, how many more times her past would drag her back, and what pieces of herself she would lose each time it did. Sometimes silence is armor. Sometimes it's a cage. What made Morrison hesitate before confronting her? It wasn't the kills. It wasn't even the speed. It was the calm. Most people coming out of a firefight like that would shake, swear, collapse, laugh hysterically. Something to release the surge of adrenaline that hijacks the human body. But Ariana Brooks sat quietly beside Richmond in the helicopter, adjusting his fluids, checking his blood pressure, brushing dust off his chest plate as casually as if she were tidying a hospital bed. No trembling. No wide eyes. No adrenaline crash. Just the soft, steady rhythm of someone who did this every day. Davis kept watching her like she was a ghost who hadn't yet realized she was dead. Mills pretended not to stare, but he was gripping the straps above him so hard that his knuckles were bone white. Morrison watched all 3 of them. And he watched her most of all. When the Blackhawk touched down on base, she was the first to move. already stepping off, already signaling the medics, already briefing the surgical team with a precision that didn't surprise anyone anymore, but maybe it should have. Richmond was rushed away on a stretcher. Ariana jogged alongside him, rattling off vitals, morphine dosage, stabilization time, estimated blood loss, every word calm. She didn't even look like she had been in combat. Mills leaned toward Morrison. "Chief, that wasn't normal." "No," Morrison muttered, "it was." But he didn't know whether he said it with awe or concern. Inside the medical tent, Ariana oversaw the handoff, then stepped back, wiping blood from her hands with a towel. She didn't look tired. She didn't look relieved. She simply looked composed. Too composed. She turned to leave. "Lieutenant Brooks," Morrison called. She paused. "Walk with me." She followed him out of the tent, boots crunching on gravel under the harsh glow of the floodlights. The base around them buzzed with activity, resupply trucks, personnel hustling, distant engines humming. But in the pocket of space between buildings where he stopped, it felt quiet. Too quiet. He studied her for a long moment, searching her face for something, fear, guilt, pride, anything human. But all he saw was neutrality. "I've been doing this a long time," he said finally. "I know combat, I know people, and what I saw tonight." He shook his head. That wasn't a nurse reacting under pressure. She didn't blink. "I did what was necessary to get everyone out alive." "That's not an answer. It's the only one I have." Her voice was soft, controlled. Too controlled. Morrison crossed his arms. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" "Quantico," she said. "I qualified expert." That explains one shot at a paper target, not headshots under fire, not reloads that fast, not movement like. "Chief," she cut in gently, "it was chaotic, lots of adrenaline. People do extraordinary things when they need to." "No," he said, "they really don't." Ariana's eyes flickered, not annoyance, not fear, something else. A weariness, a shadow. "Why do you care?" she asked quietly. "You got your men home." "That's exactly why I care," he shot back. "Because I don't take men into battle with unknown variables." Her jaw tightened just slightly. He noticed. But she didn't answer him. Instead, she said what he wasn't expecting. "What matters is that Richmond will survive." "That's not what I asked." "That's all you need to know." Her tone hardened, not loud, not aggressive, but layered with a quiet authority that didn't belong to a medical officer. Not the kind made by rank, but the kind carved by experience. She turned to leave. He grabbed her arm, not roughly, just enough to stop her. Her reaction was instant. Not dramatic. Not defensive. Just precise. She rotated her wrist in a controlled counter-movement that broke his grip without hurting him, a technique Morrison recognized instantly. A joint manipulation. Special operations training. Not something taught in medical school. He froze. She held his wrist, not aggressively, just firmly enough to make a point. "Please don't do that again, Chief." The way she said it unsettled him. Not because it was a threat, but because it was. It was a reminder. A quiet warning from someone who had spent too many years learning what hands could do. She released him immediately and walked away. He didn't follow. He stood there, rubbing his wrist, realizing he'd just seen the tip of something buried far deeper than he ever expected. Later, back at his quarters, he opened her personnel file. 5 years Navy nurse. Combat trauma specialty. Top of her medical class. Expert marksmanship. All normal. But then he saw it, tucked in the civilian section. A degree in international relations from Georgetown. 12 years ago. And a 2-year gap before medical school. 2 years labeled simply as private sector employment. No employer name. No records. No explanation. He leaned back in his chair, staring at nothing for a long time. He knew what cover stories looked like. He had seen his share of classified personnel files. He had met people whose pasts didn't exist on paper. Ariana Brooks didn't fit in the world her paperwork claimed. And yet she never acted proud of what she did. She never bragged, never wanted the spotlight, never even acknowledged the team's shock. Almost as if she despised the part of herself that had surfaced tonight. He closed the file, hands clasped hard together. People don't hide skills like hers unless they've had to use them in places the government pretends don't exist. And people don't run from things that didn't break them. Over the next 2 days, the team recovered, resupplied, and tried to pretend the impossible hadn't happened. Mills avoided talking about it. Davis tried to joke about it but always stopped halfway through. Richmond, recovering in surgery, kept asking who carried him. Everyone said the nurse, but none of them said it convincingly. Only Ariana acted normal, too normal, checking on her patients, updating charts, giving quiet recommendations. No one dared ask how many she had killed, or how she had killed them. She kept her head down, her voice soft, her posture unthreatening, as if by shrinking herself she could erase what they had witnessed. But Morrison saw it. The discipline, the restraint, the control. None of it belonged to a person running from violence. It belonged to someone terrified of what they were capable of. 3 nights after the mission, he finally said it aloud. To no one, to the empty room, to the truth he didn't want to believe. She didn't save us because she's a killer. He rubbed his forehead, exhaling slowly. She saved us because she was trying not to be one. And somewhere outside, in the quiet dim lights of the base perimeter, Ariana Brooks sat alone, staring into the mountains, feeling the weight of a past she couldn't outrun. She didn't want to be that person again. But fate didn't care what she wanted. It only cared what she could do. And soon, far too soon, she would be forced to decide again. Some skills are blessings. Some are curses. Most are both. And she carried all of them. What made the second mission feel wrong before they even launched? Ariana sensed it first, not through intel, not through briefing slides, but through something quieter, older, sharper. She sat at the edge of the room during the mission brief, her hands folded neatly on her lap while Morrison pointed at a map projected onto the wall. Rural compound, light resistance, maybe 6 to 8 fighters, he said. That should have eased tension in the room. It didn't. Mills frowned. Davis leaned back uncomfortably. Even the younger operator, Jackson, always quick to grin, kept tapping his boot. The numbers were too clean, the intel too confident, the timing too convenient. But Ariana stayed silent, her eyes on the map, her expression flat in a way that made Morrison watch her more than the slides. When the briefing ended, Morrison approached her. "Something on your mind, Lieutenant?" She hesitated, not long, but long enough for him to register it. "I don't like the structure of the compound," she said softly. 2-story main building, narrow access points, elevated perimeter walls. If the enemy is organized. "They're not," Morrison cut in. "Intel says small group, lightly armed." Ariana blinked once. She didn't argue, she didn't challenge. She simply nodded, a motion too compliant to be genuine. She walked away without another word. And Morrison realized, too late, that she wasn't worried about the mission. She was worried about what the mission might make her become. Hours later, as they prepped at the airfield, Ariana moved with practiced efficiency. She checked medical kits, loaded analgesics, ensured stretchers were strapped correctly. Everything she did supported the illusion she worked hard to maintain. The illusion of a nurse. But Mills saw something different tonight. How her eyes tracked shadows, how her shoulders remained slightly tense, how she scanned the horizon like someone who expected betrayal from the land itself. "You okay, Doc?" he asked, buckling his vest. "I'm fine." She said it too quickly. The team launched. The Blackhawk skimmed low over rugged terrain, moonlight slicing across jagged rocks. The vibration of the fuselage matched the pounding in every operator's chest, except hers. Ariana sat silent, steady, almost too still. Not frozen with fear, but contained, like someone locking a door inside themselves. The kind of lock that only exists to keep something dangerous from getting out. Morrison's hand tightened on the metal bar above him. He hoped tonight wouldn't require her to open that door again. But hope rarely survives contact with reality. The insertion began smoothly enough. The team hit the ground in perfect formation. Ariana stepped behind them, her medical pack cinched tight, her weapon slung harmlessly, almost meekly. For the first 30 seconds, everything aligned with the intel report. Then the world exploded. Gunfire erupted from 3 directions. Muzzle flashes lit the hills. The 2-story building that was supposed to house 6 to 8 lightly armed fighters erupted with coordinated fire patterns, machine gun nests, spotters, overlapping arcs. 50 fighters at least. Mills shouted, "Ambush, get to cover." Davis barely dove behind a low wall before bullets carved into the dirt where he'd stood. Morrison swore into his mic, "All teams pull back. Air support is 20 minutes out, we have to." But the enemy was pushing fast, too fast. Ariana crouched low behind a broken column, her breathing steady even as the SEALs scrambled to keep from being overrun. She keyed her mic with unsettling calm. "Chief, I'm moving to your position." Morrison snapped, "Negative, stay with security." "I'm already moving." And she was. Before he could argue, she darted through the darkness, slipping between bursts of gunfire like the night was guiding her steps. Her silhouette blurred against shadows and smoke until even Mills couldn't see her clearly. "Where the hell is she?" he murmured. But Morrison knew. She wasn't running toward safety. She was running toward inevitability. She reached their position just as a machine gun team tried to flank the SEALs. She didn't hesitate. 3 shots tight, precise, deadly, dropped the entire team. Mills stared stunned. How did she see them? They weren't even. Ariana cut him off softly. "Machine gun nest, 12 o'clock, 2nd floor." Morrison popped up, saw the barrel jutting from the window. "We can't get an angle." "I can." Before he could say no, she was already gone, slipping into darkness like a ghost returning home. And what followed was unlike anything they'd ever seen from her, or anyone. Ariana moved fast but not recklessly, every step calculated, every angle measured. She wasn't fighting with adrenaline, she was fighting with memory. A fighter lunged from behind a wall. She shot him mid-motion. Another appeared on the roof. She took him before he steadied his rifle. She rounded the corner where visibility was worst, but she didn't slow. She was already aiming at someone Mills hadn't even spotted yet. It wasn't luck. It wasn't instinct. It was the kind of awareness born from a life she refused to acknowledge. A life built in places where mistakes meant death, where survival meant becoming something cold and precise. Inside 12 minutes, a window barely long enough to fully load a helicopter, 47 enemy fighters lay dead. 47 men who had trained for years. 47 men who were confident enough to set an ambush on a SEAL team. 47 men who never understood what they were up against. And through it all, Ariana's movements remained the same. Controlled. Measured. Unwavering. No wasted bullets. No unnecessary risks. No anger. No fear. Just purpose. When the last gunfire faded, she didn't celebrate, didn't breathe hard, didn't look at the carnage. She simply turned, walked back toward the SEALs and knelt beside Petty Officer Jackson, who had taken shrapnel to the arm. "Hold still," she whispered, pulling gauze from her pack. Jackson stared at her like she was a phantom. "Doc, you just." "SHH." Her tone softened. "You're going to be fine." She wrapped his arm as calmly, as if she hadn't just dismantled an entire hostile network single-handedly. Morrison approached her slowly, cautiously, as if a sudden movement might break the fragile boundary she was holding together. "You can't keep doing this," he said quietly. "Doing what?" she asked, not looking up from Jackson's wound. "Pretending you're someone you're not." She paused mid-rap, just a breath, just long enough for the truth to flicker behind her eyes. Then she said softly, "I am exactly who I appear to be." "No," he whispered, "you're not." She taped the gauze, stood, and finally faced him. Her expression was blank, but her eyes held something brittle, something tired. "Chief," she murmured, "don't ask questions you don't want answers to." He stepped closer, "And you don't want to give them." "No," she said, "I really don't." She walked away, leaving Morrison in a courtyard littered with spent casings, broken weapons, and shadows that weren't supposed to exist. He watched her silhouette fade into the smoke, understanding with a weight he didn't want to carry. She didn't kill because she enjoyed it. She killed because she was trained to do it better than anyone else. And because some part of her wished she didn't remember how. Some battles happen on the field. Others happen inside the soul. Ariana was fighting both, and losing one far more quietly. Why did she hesitate before answering his question? The courtyard still smelled of gunpowder when the SEALs began sweeping what was left of the compound. Smoke drifted from broken windows. Somewhere in a corner, a radio crackled with static, enemy comms still transmitting to no one. The moon hung low, framed by ruined walls that now belonged to silence rather than bullets. But Ariana didn't look at any of it. She stood alone near a collapsed pillar, wiping someone else's blood from her sleeves with slow, thoughtful motions. The knuckles of her gloves were scuffed, tiny scratches, almost invisible, the kind you'd only notice if you'd been watching her hands all night. Morrison approached, his boots crunching across debris. "You knew this wasn't a six-man outpost," he said quietly, "didn't you?" She didn't answer right away, didn't flinch, didn't turn. Finally, she folded the cloth neatly, too neatly, and tucked it into a pocket. "I knew the intel didn't feel right," she said softly, "that's all." He didn't believe her. And she knew he didn't. Before he could press further, Mills jogged over. "Chief, you need to see this." Morrison followed him around the courtyard toward what used to be a series of interior rooms. The walls were lined with maps, whiteboards, encrypted radios, an entire nerve center of operations, far beyond anything the mission brief had suggested. "Jesus," Davis whispered. It wasn't an outpost. It was a command node. Plans, routes, targeting data. The kind of intel that could cost hundreds of American lives if left untouched. Morrison exhaled slowly. This wasn't luck. Ariana stepped in behind them, her expression unreadable. Davis pointed to a chart with marked patrol paths. "Doc, did you know about this?" "No." Her voice was calm, but something underneath it trembled. Not fear, not guilt, something harder to name. Something older. Mills swallowed, "But you weren't surprised." She didn't deny it. For the first time all night, she looked like she wanted to be anywhere else. Morrison stepped closer. "You knew something bigger was here." She kept her eyes on the maps. "I knew the risk." "That's not all you knew," he said. She didn't answer. Morrison turned to his men. "Secure the building, bag everything. I'll coordinate with intel." The SEALs moved out, leaving Morrison and Ariana alone in the dim flicker of broken lights. He approached slowly, like someone approaching a wild animal that wasn't sure whether it wanted to run or bite. "You told me not to ask questions I wouldn't want answers to," he said. "I'm asking anyway." Ariana finally met his eyes. And in that moment he saw it clearly, something painful, something she'd kept buried for years. She didn't want to be questioned because she didn't want to remember. "Chief," she whispered, "some stories do more harm when spoken." "That's not an answer. It's the only one that won't get people hurt." He studied her, trying to find the seam where her mask began. But she didn't have a mask, he realized. Not really. She had layers. Shields. Walls built from regret and necessity. But not lies. "Why did you join the Navy?" he asked. She blinked. "Because I wanted to help people." "No," he said softly. "That's why you became a nurse. Why did you join the military?" Her jaw tightened. Morrison continued. "Because people who move like you, shoot like you, fight like you, don't pick jobs like this unless they're trying to." She cut him off, her voice almost a whisper, to quiet something inside them. He froze. She swallowed, choosing her words carefully, painfully. "Some people run away from their past by leaving places. Others run by changing who they are. I thought if I learned how to heal, maybe I wouldn't have to hurt people anymore." Her throat tightened, but she forced the next words out. "But sometimes the past follows. And sometimes the skills you want most to forget are the ones you need most to survive." Morrison stepped back, stunned by the rawness in her tone. It wasn't an admission. It wasn't an explanation. It was a wound. Before he could speak, a shout echoed from outside. "Chief, we got movement." Morrison snapped instinctively into command mode. "Positions, defensive perimeter now." The SEALs scrambled. Ariana grabbed her medical pack, moving toward the wounded they'd gathered under cover, automatic reflex. But Morrison caught her arm gently. "No," he said. "Get behind the wall, we'll handle." She shook her head. "I'm not leaving them." And she didn't. She crouched beside two injured operators as gunfire erupted from the tree line. The returning enemy fighters were disorganized, desperate, remnants of the force she'd cut through. Not enough to break a SEAL team, but enough to make the extraction messy. Bullets cracked against stone. The SEALs returned fire. Mills shouted for angles. Davis yelled for ammo. Ariana stayed low, shielding the wounded with her own body. Not her weapon. Her body. One bullet struck the wall inches from her shoulder. Another pinged off a metal pipe and ricocheted overhead. Still she stayed. Still she didn't reach for the rifle she'd hidden again. Morrison realized it then, not with logic, but with the kind of clarity only danger reveals. She didn't want to fight tonight. Didn't want to be that person again so soon. Didn't want to feed the part of her that came alive in violence. But the world didn't care what she wanted. "Doc," Jackson called out, bleeding again. I'm hit." She moved instantly, sliding to him, pressing gauze into a fresh wound. "You're okay," she murmured, her voice steady even as gunfire intensified. "Stay with me." Another round cracked against the wall. Morrison cursed under his breath. He crouched beside her. "Get out of the open." "No." Her eyes met his, not defiant, just resolute. "I don't get to choose when I'm needed." Her voice trembled, for the first time Morrison had ever heard. "And I don't get to choose what I become when I'm pushed." She lowered her head, returning to her patient. The attack ended quickly. The SEALs pushed the fighters back into the trees, eliminating the threat. But what lingered wasn't victory. It was the image of Ariana kneeling between gunfire and the wounded, refusing to pick up that rifle again. When the extraction helicopter arrived, she helped load the casualties with clinical calm. No one spoke. No one dared. The air felt thick with unasked questions, unspoken fears, and the realization that she carried something none of them understood. Back on base, she disappeared into the medical tent, not to hide, not to deny what happened, but to work, to heal. Hours later, when the team gathered outside to decompress, she remained inside with the wounded, checking vitals, adjusting bandages, wiping blood, whispering reassurances no one else heard. When she finally emerged into the dim pre-dawn light, Morrison was waiting. He didn't confront her, didn't interrogate her, didn't demand answers. He simply asked one question, softly, honestly. "Are you okay?" She stopped walking. Her expression didn't break. Her voice didn't quiver. But her eyes, just for a moment, looked older, heavier, tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. "No," she whispered. Then softer, "But I will be." She moved past him, disappearing into the shadows of the base. Morrison watched her go, feeling something he rarely felt on deployment. Genuine worry. Not because she was dangerous, but because she was hurting more than she let anyone see. And because the next mission would drag her back into the part of herself she feared most. And when that happened, something inside her would crack. Not her aim, not her resolve, not her body, her heart. Some warriors fight the enemy in front of them. Others fight the one inside. Ariana fought both. And one of them was winning. What finally broke her silence? The days after the ambush felt strangely calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that exists only to trick the body into lowering its guard before the next storm. Base routines resumed, the whine of generators, the metallic clang of maintenance tools, the occasional rumble of distant aircraft. On the surface, everything looked normal. But Ariana wasn't. She moved like someone walking through fog, her motions precise but distant. She completed rounds, checked charts, monitored vitals with her usual meticulous efficiency, yet something in her presence had shifted. A quiet heaviness clung to her shoulders, the weight of a truth she refused to name. She didn't speak about the mission. She didn't acknowledge what she'd done. She didn't look anyone in the eye for long. Especially not Morrison. The SEALs noticed it too. Jackson, his arm wrapped in fresh bandages, whispered to Mills one night, "Doc's off. You see it, right?" Mills nodded. "I think she hates what she did." "Hate she saved our lives. That doesn't mean she liked how." The base lights flickered in the wind. Dust hissed across the ground. Somewhere far off, a radio played an old country song. And Ariana sat alone on an overturned crate outside the medical tent, staring at the desert horizon as if she were waiting for something to rise from it. Or maybe waiting for something inside her to settle. She barely moved when Morrison approached. "You didn't show up for dinner," he said gently. "I wasn't hungry." "You haven't been hungry since we got back." She didn't respond. He sat on the crate beside hers, not close enough to corner her, not far enough to let her retreat into silence. "Talk to me," he said. "No," she whispered. He waited. She sighed, closing her eyes briefly, as if choosing her words carefully enough might keep them from hurting. "Chief, when I said I didn't want to remember who I used to be, that wasn't an exaggeration." "I know." "No, you don't." She shook her head, her voice tightening. "You can't." A long pause sat between them, thick, brittle, fragile. Then she exhaled, quietly, painfully. "People assume the worst part of violence is what it does to the body." She paused. "They're wrong." Morrison didn't interrupt. "The worst part," she continued, "is what it does to the mind, how it rewires your instincts, how it teaches you to see threats everywhere, how it shapes your reflexes so deeply that even when you try to be gentle, Some part of you is always calculating the fastest way to end someone. Her hands trembled, barely noticeable. Do you know what it's like to spend years becoming lethal, she whispered, and then spend more years trying to become harmless? Morrison's voice dropped. I know what it's like to lose pieces of yourself to war. But I wasn't at war, she said softly. I was somewhere worse. He felt that line like a stone sinking into water. She stared toward the mountains, dark silhouettes against fatting dusk. Those 2 years missing from my file, she said, they weren't an accident. They weren't administrative oversight. They were erased, sanitized. Morrison's pulse quickened. By who? She gave a small, empty smile. People who don't leave fingerprints. He swallowed. What did you do for them? She turned her head slightly, just enough for him to see the pain behind her composure. Things I can't undo, she whispered. Things I didn't want to remember. Things no one in uniform should have to be good at. And yet, Morrison said quietly, you are. That's the problem. Her voice cracked, not loudly, not dramatically, but the kind of quiet crack that revealed something deeper, grief. I became a nurse because I needed to fix something in myself, she said. I thought if I learned to heal people, it would balance the scales, make me less dangerous, make me human again. You are human. She shook her head. You didn't see me in that compound, Chief. Not really. I did. No. She swallowed hard. You saw me slipping. You saw the part of me I trained so long to bury. He didn't argue. He didn't contradict her. He let her speak. You want to know the truth? She asked. Her voice was a thin thread. I didn't hesitate because I was brave. I didn't move fast because I was skilled. I did those things because they were easy, too easy. She looked at her hands, turning them palm up. Violence shouldn't be easy, not for anyone. Morrison shifted closer, slowly, carefully, like approaching a wounded animal that might lash out or collapse. What you did saved lives, he said, mine included. That doesn't make it right. Does it make it wrong? Her jaw clenched. I don't know anymore. He could have said a dozen things, could have reassured her, could have told her she was a hero, but he didn't, because he knew those words would cut her instead of comfort her. So he said something simpler. What scares you most? Her answer was immediate. Myself. And the honesty of it hurt more than anything else she'd said. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw a woman who had carried too much, lost too much, and survived too much to ever completely return to the person she once tried to be. But she wasn't broken. Just tired. Silence stretched between them until the night air cooled around them. The wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of diesel and dust. A light flickered in the medical tent behind her. Someone coughed inside. A generator hum vibrated in the distance. Normal sounds. But nothing inside her felt normal. Finally she stood. Thank you for listening, she said softly. I shouldn't have said any of that. I'm glad you did. She hesitated. It doesn't change anything. No, he said, but it helps me understand. She gave a faint, grateful nod. But before either of them could say more, a siren sliced through the night, the short, sharp tone that meant one thing on this base. Incoming wounded. Ariana straightened instantly, not with fear, not with dread, but with purpose. Go, Morrison said. She was already moving. Within seconds, she crossed the dirt, sprinted into the bright, chaotic interior of the medical tent, and disappeared behind the canvas flaps. But something about her posture had changed. She wasn't running away from her past tonight. She was running toward something else, something she could still control. Saving lives. Healing wounds. And maybe, in tiny pieces, healing herself. Morrison watched from the outside, the siren still echoing, dust swirling in the air, and he knew one truth with unsettling clarity. For all her fear of who she used to be, she didn't yet understand how much good she was capable of doing. And somewhere deep inside her, a battle was beginning to shift. Warriors like Ariana didn't search for redemption through words. They searched for it through actions. One patient at a time. One night at a time. One choice at a time. Even if that choice hurt. Even if that choice came with a price. Especially because it did. Why did Morrison wake up the next morning with a feeling of dread? He couldn't name it, couldn't define it, but it sat in his chest like a weight that refused to shift. Not fear, not anxiety, something else, something quieter but sharper. The sense that the ground beneath all of them was beginning to move. He found himself walking toward the medical tent before sunrise, half expecting to find Ariana sitting alone again, staring at the horizon like she often did. But she wasn't there. The crate she usually sat on was empty. The air around it felt colder without her in it. Inside the tent, the lights were dim. Two of the wounded slept. The medics shuffled around, finishing night duties. But Ariana was nowhere. Morrison turned to one of the corpsmen, Lieutenant Brooks. "Haven't seen her since she finished rounds at 400, he said. "Checked every patient, then stepped out for air." He pointed toward the far end of the base, toward the perimeter. Not a good sign. Ariana never walked without purpose. Morrison made his way there, boots crunching on gravel as dawn crept across the sky in pale streaks. And then he saw her. She stood with her back to him, leaning against the wire fence, head bowed slightly. Her hands gripped the top of the barrier, fingers curling against metal. He almost turned around. Almost left her alone. But she had opened a door the night before, just a crack, and he knew that if he let it swing shut again, she might never open it again. "Ariana," he called gently. She turned slowly, her eyes reflecting something exhausted and fragile. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. She gave a small, humorless smile. "I don't really sleep anymore." He nodded. He'd seen that before, in men who carried too many memories, in men who'd killed too often, too precisely, too young. But something in her eyes wasn't the same as them. Her ghosts came from a different battlefield. Before he could speak, the base's loudspeakers crackled. "All teams briefing at 700. Mandatory, repeat mandatory." Ariana sighed, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Another mission," she murmured. "It looks like it." She nodded, but something in her face tightened. Not fear, not frustration, something colder. The realization that whatever was coming next, she might not have the strength to keep herself contained. Morrison wanted to tell her she didn't have to fight alone. But she walked past him silently, returning to the tent before he could find the words. At 700, the briefing room was packed. It wasn't a typical mission brief. Intel officers from HQ, two new faces in suits, a secure laptop connected to something none of them had clearance to see, a map pinned to the board with bright markers. The atmosphere was tense. Morrison felt Ariana enter the room before he saw her, felt the stillness her presence created among the men who had witnessed what she could do. When she took her usual seat in the back, no one made eye contact with her. Not because they feared her. Because they didn't know how to understand her. The officer leading the brief cleared his throat. 2 weeks ago, we received intel about a growing militant network. We believed we were targeting outposts, storage sites, communication hubs. He clicked a remote. The screen changed to an aerial image of a much larger facility. Weapons, vehicles, trenches. A complete base. "Turns out those were decoys," he continued. "The real command center is here." A location appeared on the map, deep in the mountains, surrounded by natural choke points, reinforced structures, and heavily armed fighters. the kind of place hostile forces used when they wanted to ensure a fight ended in blood. "The mission is simple," the officer said, though nothing about his expression was simple. "We're taking it down." Mills sucked in a breath. Davis whispered a curse. Morrison ran a hand through his hair. "What's the actual estimate? 50 fighters? More?" The officer hesitated, which was never a good sign. "Closer to 100. The room went silent. Ariana didn't move. She didn't blink. She just stared at the map. The officer continued, "Extraction windows will be tight, air support limited, most engagement will be close quarters." Morrison's stomach twisted. This was a massacre waiting to happen. He glanced toward Ariana. She hadn't moved an inch. But the air around her felt wrong, heavy, as if she was bracing herself the way someone braces before falling. Then the officer said something that made her flinch. "You will have medical support on site." Her head lifted only slightly, but Morrison saw it. "We will be assigning Lieutenant Brooks to accompany the primary assault element." A chair slid as Mills half rose. "Sir, request to speak freely." "Denied." "Sir, with respect, she's a nurse. That's a kill box. She needs to stay with." The officer cut him off coldly. "Lieutenant Brooks is the most capable medical asset on this base. She goes." Morrison's jaw clenched. He really tried. "Sir," he said carefully, "may I ask who made that decision?" The two suits in the back exchanged glances. One of them spoke. "We did." Their eyes flicked toward Ariana, evaluating, measuring. But she didn't look at them. She kept staring at the map, her posture controlled, her breathing shallow. Something was very, very wrong. After the briefing ended, the room emptied slowly, operators murmuring under their breath, glancing at Ariana as though she carried the mission's outcome in her pocket. Morrison intercepted her at the door. "Why you?" he asked quietly. Ariana's voice was barely audible. "Because they know I can keep you alive." "That's not what I meant." She swallowed. "You know it isn't my call. But it's not just a medical assignment." He lowered his voice. "They want something else from you." Her eyes drifted to the suits, now speaking quietly to the intel officers. "They always do," she whispered. Her voice cracked. "People like them, they never really let you go." Morrison felt his pulse harden. "Don't let them use you." She gave a small, tired smile. "It's not that simple, Chief." "It can be." She looked at him, really looked at him, and he felt the depth of her exhaustion, the weight she carried, the past she'd been running from since the day she put on a nurse's uniform. "It's never simple when you know how to do things you wish you didn't know how to do," she said. Her voice was quiet. Her eyes were shining with something dangerously close to regret. "And it's even less simple when people in suits remember what you're capable of, even when you wish they'd forget." Morrison stepped closer. "You don't have to be that weapon again." Her breath trembled. "But what if I'm the only one who doesn't get a choice?" He opened his mouth to answer, but she stepped past him, heading toward the exit, shoulders tight, pace steady, moving like a woman walking toward a fate she knew she couldn't escape. As she passed through the doorway, he heard her whisper something he wasn't meant to hear. "I don't want to go back to that person." She paused, just for a heartbeat, as if her body remembered something her mind tried desperately to forget. "But I think she's already waking up." She disappeared into sunlight, and Morrison understood the dread he'd felt that morning. Because the next mission wouldn't just test them. It would break her. The real question wasn't whether they would survive the assault. It was whether Ariana Brooks could survive becoming the person she once promised herself she would never be again. And some promises, once broken, shatter more than just belief. They shatter the soul. What does a person feel on the walk toward a mission they know might break them? Ariana wasn't afraid of dying. Death to her was simple, quiet, a closing of a door. What terrified her was living long enough to become the version of herself the suits in the back room remembered, the one she'd buried under years of medical school, humanitarian rotations, nights spent learning how to stitch wounds instead of open them. As she walked across the base toward the flight line, she felt it inside her, a shifting, a stirring, a whisper. Not a voice, not a memory. A state of being. The thing she once had to become in order to survive. The thing they were pulling her back into. The thing she hated most. She tightened the straps of her medical pack, not trusting her hands, not trusting the way her body moved without hesitation, not trusting the way combat readiness slipped over her like an old coat she didn't want but remembered how to wear. She didn't want to go. She didn't want to be this. But she walked anyway. Because the team needed her. Because lives were at stake. Because sometimes the choice that breaks you is the only one that keeps other people alive. Morrison jogged beside her, sweat shining across his brow even in the cold morning air. He didn't speak for a long time, just kept pace, as if being near her might help him understand the weight she carried. Finally, he said, "You don't have to do anything alone." She smiled faintly, tiredly. "People like me always do." He stopped walking. Ariana. She stopped too, but she didn't turn. He breathed hard, gathering the courage to say something he should have said long ago. "You are not what they made you." She closed her eyes. "That's the problem," she whispered. "I was, and part of me still is." He stepped closer. "But you've spent years building something else, something better." For the first time that morning, she turned to face him. Her eyes weren't cold or sharp or distant. They were scared. "I don't know if I can hold on to that person out there," she said. "Not in a place like this. Not when everything inside me knows how to do the wrong thing so well." He softened his voice. "You're not doing the wrong thing, you're saving lives." "But at what cost?" she asked. Before he could answer, the rotor blades of the Blackhawk thundered above them. Mission time. She took a single step backward. "Whatever happens," she said softly, "don't pull me further than I can return." He swallowed hard. "I won't." She nodded, accepting that as the closest thing to reassurance she'd get, then climbed aboard. The SEALs watched her enter, their expressions a mixture of respect, guilt, and something they didn't know how to name. They trusted her with their lives, yet none of them understood the price she paid every time she saved them. The helicopter lifted off, slicing through the cold dawn air. Morrison sat across from her, studying her posture, upright, still, breath-controlled. But her fingers tapped lightly against her knee, a small rhythm, a quiet tell. She was preparing herself for something she didn't want to become. As the mountains rose beneath them, jagged and gray, Mills leaned close to Morrison. "You think she's gonna, do it again?" Morrison didn't answer. He didn't want to be right. And he didn't want to be wrong. 20 minutes later, the team fast-roped down into a rocky ravine leading toward the enemy base. The air smelled of dust and cold metal. The world was silent except for the hum of distant generators and the crackle of static in their earpieces. Ariana landed last. Her boots touched the ground without sound. Her eyes scanned the terrain instantly, angles, shadows, overlapping fields of fire. She didn't mean to do it. She didn't want to, it simply happened. Muscle memory. Old training. Ghost reflexes waking up. They moved forward in formation. Morrison kept Ariana between him and Mills, knowing she'd try to drift to the edges, to protect herself, to distance herself, to keep from being the first one forced into violence. But the first shot didn't care where she stood. It tore through the air from above, snapping past Davis's shoulder and shattering rock behind them. Contact, someone yelled. Gunfire erupted from the hillside. Fighters poured from dugouts, firing down into the ravine. The SEALs took cover behind boulders, returning fire as Ariana dropped to a crouch beside a wounded operator who had taken shrapnel to the thigh. "I've got you," she whispered, pressing her hand to the wound. Bullets sparked against stone behind her. Dust filled the air. Someone yelled for suppressing fire. Morrison crawled toward her. "Doc, get behind cover." "No," she said firmly. "He's bleeding out." "This isn't safe." "It's a battlefield, Chief. None of it's safe." She kept pressure on the wound, even as another volley rained down. Mills fired upward. "We're pinned." Davis shouted, "We need a new angle." Morrison grabbed Ariana's shoulder. "We need you alive." She finally looked at him. And in that moment, Morrison saw the war happening inside her. The part of her that wanted to stay a healer. And the part that never forgot how to kill. "Let me finish," she said softly. Her voice not scared, not angry, just resolute. But the situation wasn't slowing down. The hillside fighters were moving fast, shifting positions, preparing to flank. Morrison saw it coming, but too late. Ariana saw it earlier. Her head turned, not to the wounded man, not to Morrison, but toward a shadow at the cliff's edge. She recognized the movement. A flanking maneuver. Two fighters, both aiming down. She dropped the bandage. Her hand moved before thought caught up. She reached inside her pack, into a stitched pocket no medic should ever need, and drew out a suppressed sidearm she shouldn't have carried. And for a moment, one terrible, quiet moment, Morrison saw the shift in her eyes. Steel. Focus. Acceptance. Not of what she wanted to be, but of what she needed to be. She fired twice. Two silhouettes collapsed onto the rocks above. Silence slammed into the ravine. Morrison's throat tightened. Mills stared wide-eyed. Jackson muttered something that sounded like a prayer. Ariana lowered the pistol slowly, her breath steady, her hands steady. Too steady. She turned back to the wounded operator, resuming pressure like nothing had happened. But something had. The door she'd fought to keep closed had cracked. And something inside her had stepped out. Not fully, not completely. But enough. The SEALs managed to push forward, clearing the ravine, moving toward the main structure. The fighting grew heavier. The walls were reinforced. Snipers waited in hidden corners. Every step deeper into the compound pulled them deeper into enemy territory, and deeper into the one place Ariana feared most. Herself. At the entrance to the main building, the SEALs stacked up. Morrison whispered, "Stay behind us, Ariana." She nodded. But Morrison didn't miss how her hand hovered near her weapon, how her breathing slowed, how her eyes sharpened. He leaned in. "Hey, look at me." She did. "You're not who you were." Her voice came out low, brittle. "Then why does it feel like she's taking over?" "Because you're scared." She swallowed hard. "I don't want to lose who I became." "You won't. You don't know that." He didn't. But he said the only thing he could. "Hold on to the parts of you that matter. The rest, let me carry." She looked at him for a long time. Then nodded. And the team breached. Thunder erupted inside the room, gunfire shouting, the echo of boots against concrete. The enemy fought hard. The SEALs moved harder. Ariana followed in the back, not leading, not charging, but observing everything with the dual vision of a healer and a weapon. One SEAL went down, shoulder shot. Ariana was on him instantly. Another took shrapnel. She dragged him to cover. A third stumbled from a blast. She shielded him with her body. But every time she moved, Morrison saw it. The tension. The war. The silent battle she fought with every breath. She wasn't trying not to kill. She was trying not to become someone who didn't hesitate to. And then it happened. A doorway burst open. A fighter rushed out, rifle raised, eyes locked on Mills. Ariana was closest. She could scream. She could dive. She could pull Mills down. But she didn't. Her hand moved faster than thought, faster than instinct, faster than fear. 3 shots. Perfect grouping. The fighter collapsed. Ariana froze, breath shaking. Not because of the kill, but because she hadn't hesitated. Not even for a heartbeat. Mills stared at her, chest heaving. "Doc, you saved my..." She turned away. Not out of shame, but because for the first time, the person she feared most wasn't the enemy. It was herself. Morrison grabbed her arm gently. "Ariana." She shook her head, voice cracking. "I'm losing the part of me I worked so hard to build." He wanted to deny it, wanted to assure her, wanted to say she was wrong. But he couldn't. Not yet. Not here. The mission wasn't over. And in the depths of the compound, danger waited, danger that would push her further than she'd ever been pushed before. Danger that would decide who she truly was. A healer, a weapon, or something broken between the two. The fight ahead would not just test her skill. It would test her soul. And Morrison feared the greatest loss of the mission wouldn't be a seal. It would be Ariana Brooks' last fragile piece of peace. What do you do when the fight forces you to decide who you really are? The deeper they pushed into the compound, the less the battle felt like a mission and the more it felt like a reckoning. The hallways were narrow, the corners sharp, the echo of gunfire swallowing every ounce of silence before it could breathe. Smoke drifted like slow-moving ghosts across the ground. Every shadow felt alive. Ariana stayed behind the team, but not far. Morrison kept glancing back at her, watching the way her eyes scanned every angle, not aggressively, not hungrily. Just inevitably. She didn't want this, but she couldn't turn it off. Not anymore. They reached the central corridor, reinforced steel, thick concrete, the kind of layout meant to protect high-value targets or secrets. The suits had told them this place mattered, but they never said why. The why was waiting for them, behind a blast door at the end of the hall. Mills planted a charge. "Stand back." Ariana didn't move behind cover. She crouched beside a wounded SEAL, her hands already checking his vitals, her body shielding him from potential shock waves. Morrison shouted, "Ariana." "We don't leave the wounded unprotected," she said. "Not ever." The door blew inward. Dust and smoke rose in a suffocating wave. The SEALs stormed in. But they stopped almost immediately. Because the room wasn't a command center. Wasn't a weapons cache. Wasn't a hideout for fighters. It was something far worse. Rows of monitors lined the walls, surveillance feeds, satellite maps, communications logs, and in the center documents detailing attacks across multiple regions. Plans, timelines, strike orders. A war room. The kind used to orchestrate chaos. The kind meant to destabilize everything. Davis whispered, This is huge." But Morrison wasn't looking at the screens. He was looking at Ariana. Her face wasn't shocked. Wasn't confused. Wasn't even surprised. It was resigned. As if she had known something like this was coming. As if she had been waiting for it. He stepped toward her slowly. "Ariana, what is this?" She shook her head once, tiny, subtle, almost invisible. "Not now," she whispered. Before he could press her, shouts came from the far end of the room. Movement. A hidden door burst open. Fighters poured out, more trained than the ones outside, faster, coordinated, wearing tactical gear rather than mismatched clothing. These weren't foot soldiers. These were specialists. The firefight that erupted was brutal, loud, fast, sharp, the kind that left no room for hesitation, no time for fear. The SEALs scattered to cover, returning fire. One went down, a hit to the shoulder. Ariana lunged toward him, dragging him behind a console. Bullets tore through screens. Sparks rained. Mills yelled for angles. Davis reloaded behind an overturned table. Ariana's patient gasped. "Doc, am I hit bad?" "You're fine," she said softly, even as blood poured through her fingers. "Stay with me." But she wasn't fine. None of them were. A fighter climbed onto the second level, aiming down at the group. Morrison saw him too late. Ariana didn't. She moved before anyone else. Leaping up, grabbing a fallen rifle, firing upward without hesitation. 3 shots. 3 hits. The attacker fell. She froze, her breath trembling, not from fear, but from recognition. Morrison shouted over the gunfire, "Ariana, stay behind cover." But she couldn't. Not anymore. Something inside her had already crossed a line she feared for years. Something buried had clawed its way to the surface. And now, under the weight of necessity and desperation, she wasn't just remembering the person she used to be. She was becoming her. The precision, the awareness, the lethal grace. All of it returned. And she hated it. The room shook as another blast detonated somewhere deeper inside the compound. The lights flickered. Dust cascaded from the ceiling. Morrison yelled, "We need to push forward now." The SEALs pressed ahead, clearing the last of the fighters, but more footsteps echoed from the stairwell. Ariana heard them before anyone. "3 incoming," she whispered. "How do you key in?" But before the question left Davis's mouth, 3 shadows appeared. Ariana stepped into their path, weapon raised. "Brooks, wait!" Morrison shouted. But she was already moving. Her shots were precise, intentional, not a flurry, just quiet, perfect efficiency. When the last fighter fell, she stood still. Too still. Her hands lowered slowly, as if the weapon weighed more than her own body. Morrison approached carefully. "Ariana." She didn't turn. He stepped closer. "Talk to me." "I don't want to be this person," she said quietly, her shoulders trembling. "Not again, not anymore. You're saving lives. But I'm losing myself." Her voice cracked on the last word. The room's emergency lights flickered red across her face, painting her in shades she didn't want to see. The SEALs behind them exchanged glances, some fearful, some grateful, all conflicted. Ariana wasn't just protecting them. She was tearing herself apart to do it. Before Morrison could respond, the suits from earlier crackled through the radio, voices cold, emotionless. "Team, confirm objective. Is the intel intact?" Morrison glared at the radio. "We just walked through hell. You can wait a minute." "That asset is critical," the voice insisted. "We need confirmation of." Ariana spoke over him calmly. "The data's here, all of it, and it's worse than you thought." Even the suits paused. "How do you know that, Lieutenant?" one of them asked. Silence. Too long. Too revealing. Finally, she whispered, "Because I've seen plans like these before." Morrison stared at her. "Seen them where?" She exhaled, long and tired. "In another life." The suits responded sharply. "Lieutenant Brooks, we need you too." She crushed her radio under her boot. Davis blinked. "Doc, what the?" Morrison raised a hand. "Let her talk." Ariana stepped toward the console, touching the screens gently, tracing patterns only she understood. "This isn't random, it's coordinated. Layers of redundancies, strategic misdirection. They're not planning an attack on one region." Her throat tightened. "They're planning to destabilize 3." The room went silent. Morrison spoke softly. How do you know all that? She closed her eyes. Because I spent 2 years building things like this. No one moved. No one breathed. She continued, voice trembling. Not for the Navy, not for any uniformed branch, for a program that doesn't officially exist, a program that doesn't leave trails, a program that thought I was very, very useful. Mills exhaled sharply. Jesus. Ariana kept talking because stopping meant feeling the weight of her words. I left. I left because I couldn't do it anymore, because saving lives mattered more to me than ending them, because healing felt like redemption. Her voice cracked. But I guess redemption doesn't erase skill. Morrison stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder, not to restrain her, not to guide her, but to remind her she wasn't alone. You didn't become this, he said quietly. You survived it. Ariana's eyes glistened. I don't know the difference anymore. Before she could say more, the base's structural alarms blared, a counter-sabotage sequence. The compound was rigged to detonate. They had minutes. The SEALs moved fast, grabbing drives, maps, any intel they could physically carry. Morrison pulled Ariana toward the exit. Doc, we have to go. She staggered, caught between duty and fear and memory. Morrison steadied her, guiding her through smoke-filled hallways as explosions rippled closer. They reached the courtyard just as another blast thundered behind them. Dust engulfed the air. The team sprinted toward the extraction point. Ariana glanced back only once. Not at the compound. Not at the wreckage. At the shadows behind her, the ones she'd lived with for years. Morrison grabbed her hand and pulled her forward. Come on. They boarded the helicopter as the ground ignited in fire. The rotors lifted them away from the collapsing structure, heat blasting against the fuselage. Ariana sat between Mills and Jackson, breathing hard, trembling, not from fear, not from adrenaline, but from something deeper. Loss. Loss of the illusion she had built. Loss of the boundary she had clung to. Loss of the belief that she could ever fully escape the parts of herself she despised. Morrison watched her quietly. Doc, Jackson said softly, you saved us again. She shook her head. I didn't save anyone. Morrison leaned closer. Ariana, look at me. She looked. You saved them, he said firmly. You saved me, and you saved who you are. She swallowed. You don't understand, I killed again, easily, too easily. He took her hand. And you healed again, he said. That wasn't easy, that was choice. Her breath caught. You think what you did was darkness, he said, but it was. Darkness is when you stop caring who you become. She stared at him, really stared, searching for the lie. She didn't find one. The helicopter banked toward the rising sun. Light spilled across the mountains, turning the ravine gold, washing every jagged edge in warmth. Ariana let out a shaky breath, the tension slowly peeling from her shoulders. You're not lost, Morrison murmured. You're human. She looked down at her hands, one still faintly stained with blood, the other resting over her patient's bandage. I don't know who I am anymore, she whispered. You're both, Morrison said, a healer and a fighter, and someone who never wanted either but carries both with dignity. Her eyes softened. He added, you don't need to erase your past to build your future. For the first time in days, she let her head rest back against the seat. The compound burned behind them. The mission ended. The truth revealed. But Ariana Brooks didn't break. She bent. She strained. She fell and caught herself. And somewhere in that struggle, she rediscovered something she thought she'd lost forever. Joyce. She closed her eyes as the morning sun warmed her face. Sometimes the world doesn't care who you want to be. Sometimes it asks you to be everything at once. And sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is not hide the past, but turn it toward something better. The helicopter soared higher. Ariana breathed in, and for the first time in a very long time, it didn't hurt. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Quietly, steadily, in the moments when no one is watching. And sometimes the fiercest warriors are the ones trying hardest not to be.